the first up, we're going to have Professor Sally Kift. Professor Sally Kift is the Principal Fellow of the Higher Education Academy, a Fellow of the Australian Academy of Law, and President of the Australian Learning and Teaching Fellows. And over to you, Sally, to further unpack the accord for us.
So thank you for that, Sonal, and thank you also, Barney. But I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm on the unceded lands of the Yagara and Turrbal people and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, acknowledge Indigenous colleagues in the room here today, and that these places have always been places of learning, teaching and research. Look, that was an amazing overview by Barney, and now I'm going to ruin it. And I think they did this to me because they know I sound insane, and so you'll expect nothing different. So this is further unpacking for sector literacy, because I think we all need to be part of the solution here. Bit of expectations management, which I think Barney's directed us to. These are proposals at the moment, still until the government responds. There's some potential big bangs in the budget, and you would have seen today, for example, that the Commonwealth's committed $738 million to assuring the 100% of the school resourcing standard for the Northern Territory. So, you know, we're in this pipeline, we're one part. We need to be virtuously patient, I think. That's the buffering idea. I think we need to be equipped to handle the hot takes and the naysayers, and I will be addressing at least one of those today. And this is all about, which is what we need to be positive about, a more equitable and innovative tertiary higher education, sector rather than a system, in a connected, seamless tertiary system, so part of the whole. And this is big, transformative, long-term change with a 2050 focus, with all the things that we would hope for at the heart. So this is a great time to be alive in higher education if you're us. It's one of a number of major education sector reviews, as Barney has said. Look, at the end of the day, what I'm trying to do here in a very short period of time is 408 pages with Barney's more gentle introduction. Aspirin is recommended, but I'll do my best. So this is what Barney was referencing. When I was on the AQF review with the great late Peter Noonan, he said that the headings to a report should tell a story about it. And I think this report does. So this is my first layer of trying to get into it, about doing what the minister says, turning up the dial, shifting the dial on for our sector. So it is a blueprint out to 2050, and it's all about equitable and innovation in our higher education system. It's tertiary attainment, and we're going to have to be very careful about our language from here on in. Higher education and tertiary, different things. So tertiary attainment for lifelong learning with the right skills mix, with future-focused qualifications. And then the piece that Barney has taken us to, which is mainly what we're interested in today, though I think, with respect, Barney is completely correct. This is a holistic set of reforms. So ambitious targets to meet skills needs through, and yes, the words are in there, demand-driven equity. So managed and planned, as Barney said, but demand-driven equity, which entails doubling the size of higher education. Delivering for students, and Barney's helped us with that, income support, reformed help, needs-based funding for quality student learning and teaching and experience. The research aspects of it with a new Solving Australian Challenges Strategic Fund, collaboration for a dynamic and responsive system. So the system stewardship by the ATEC, the Australian Tertiary Education Commission, with First Nations self-determination very much at the heart. The importance of regional tertiary education, real equity funding is part of the rhetoric in the report, the $10 billion Higher Education Future Fund for Infrastructure, which has an M on it for a very good reason, clearly, and then the Implementation Advisory Committee for a staged approach. So having said that, I'm going to excuse myself now from not talking any more about research, the transitioning arrangements, or the, as has been described by one G08 Vice-Chancellor, the bizarre recommendation for a higher education future fund for infrastructure. I also won't be talking very much about priority 5 in the interim report, though I acknowledge how important it is around improved higher education governance, particularly in the context of wage theft. So I think it was important that Minister Clare released the report at Fairfield Connect, which is a study hub partnership between Western Sydney, UTS and University of New South Wales. I think it reflects his underlying commitment and belief to this place-based, university-agnostic network as being a critical enabling plank for student fairness and equity and success. When he gave his speech, and I, like Barney, would recommend, and when you get these slides, you'll see a link there to the great speech the minister gave at the gala dinner, which sounds very gala. It is a blueprint, not for one budget for the next few decades. And the minister spoke very eloquently about two big barriers that needed to be broken down. First, the artificial barrier between, well, in the speech, TAFE and higher education, but it's vocational education and higher education, and what might be done about that. And I am going to try and get to that piece right at the end. The invisible barrier that stops many equity-bearing students going to university, which is why 69% of young people from wealthy families have university degrees, but only 19% from poor families. While at Fairfield, the population with a uni degree is half of the national average. And there are many recommendations, as Barney has taken us to. I'll put a link in the chat to this when I'm done, to this from Capgemini, which I think is very helpful. A one-page infographic trying to summarise the report, and I think you're all very well of the enormity of that task. But to take us to the particularly ambitious targets, it's that tertiary, again, vocational higher education attainment now shifts from 60% to at least 80%. University education for the 25 to 40-year-old group from 45% to 55%. That will mean a doubling of Commonwealth supported places to 1.8 million. And for equity groups to achieve that parity by 2035, that's an increase of 86% in their enrolment share. And there's a lot of other things in there, just pulling out for once as part of my layers. Students at the centre, recommendations, as we've heard, around improving funding, help and income support, the quality of learning and teaching, student safety and wellbeing, both on campus and online. As you would no doubt be aware, there's been a lot of takes, some of them hot, on the Accord, and they seem to be multiplying exponentially as we go through. Here are just three examples referencing the minister's idea of it being a blueprint, sweeping changes, focus on financial support, especially as regards placement poverty, a bit of poking holes about a lack of detail, but of course if there'd been too much detail, that would have been another poke hole, I'm sure. And then some moral panic about the low bar entry and repeating the disingenuous claim that students with ATARs of 45 will be conscripted into meeting a consultant's estimated attainment target. I say that's disingenuous because Learning Creates, and you can look them up on the web, I'll put a link in if you would like, to the chat, only 26% of students use ATAR as their entryway into university at the moment. I'm so glad Barney mentioned the National Tertiary Education Objective, because this is my happy place to go to start with. You know, there's a lot to like about this, and I think he's right. We need to call on it every time we make our arguments, as we will be called upon to make. So the objective of underpinning a strong, equitable and resilient democracy, driving national economic and social development and environmental sustainability, which requires a strong, dynamic and efficient tertiary education system that provides affordable and equitable opportunity for all, that delivers graduates with the creativity and technical skills needed for future workforce needs, that collaborate, that it's in an environment of collaboration and purposeful work between all stakeholders, and is for the betterment of society. I mean, who wouldn't want one of those? I'm going to buy one tomorrow. The ATEC recommendation is a big, long one. ATAC has a number of functions, including delivering the National Tertiary Education Objective, the system stewardship that Barney mentioned, and a lot of other dot points in the recommendation, but also the issue of appropriate diversity is raised again in another recommendation. So the provider category standards might be up for reconsideration, particularly about new models of delivery and collaboration. The main reason I wanted to take you to ATEC was to expand your knowledge about who would be on the ATEC board, which gives some sense of the remit of the new body. So Chief Commissioner, obviously, but First Nations Commissioner, Regional Education Commissioner, Equity Commissioner, no Disability Commissioner, I'm sorry, Darlene from ADSET, Deputy Commissioners, but also it's proposed that the ARC and TEXA come under ATEC. And I particularly wanted to take you to this stakeholder engagement through an advisory board, a First Nations Council that I'll mention in a long list of things in a moment, but particularly given the advocacy that a number of us around the sector were involved in. We've got it there under paragraph H, Roman numeral 3, a proposal for a Learning and Teaching Council to enhance the collaborative and coordination effort that will be needed to uplift learning and teaching in this new environment. Again, very quick naysaying at the Universities Australia conference just recently, this ATEC could become a monster. And of course, the obvious thing to stop it going rogue and becoming a monster is don't set it up in the first place. So let's lay down tools before we even start. So Shamit will be talking more about the governance and leadership. So this probably is the money slide for you all. My attempt to try and summarise what's going on here with the various things that we're all interested in. So students at the heart, a new funding model for growth and quality, as Barney has said, and scrapping job-ready graduates package, help reform, increase income support, acknowledging the reality of part-time work, but also part-time study. And they're the students that we know are often most vulnerable to attriting before their degree completion. Addressing placement poverty, increased PhD stipend, a job broker program for part-time work and work experience, student safety and wellbeing with the student ombudsman and a student charter recommended, quality and integrity in international education, improved learning and teaching quality, and we've already had the support for students policy come out of the interim report, and lots of other opportunities there as well, particularly Commonwealth supported places for postgraduate qualifications, which I think is of interest going forward. No early school office before September, careers advising, a percentage of student services amenities fees to assure the sustainability of student-led organisations. Nadine's going to take us in her presentation to some of these issues around income and funding. First Nations centred, there are a range of proposals there, a First Nations Council, a Commissioner, a focus on First Nations leadership and self-determination, particularly in provider governance, parity targets for First Nations students. None of these are necessarily non-contentious. A First Nations-led higher education review, a focus on First Nations knowledges in research and learning and teaching, a dedicated First Nations PhD scholarships and postdocs, demand-driven medical places for all qualified First Nations students, and an education racism survey, a focus on cultural safety, and consideration of a First Nations graduate attribute and cultural competence. And we're very fortunate to have Leanne who will help us through that. And then growth through equity. This is the demand-driven equity, as it said in recommendations 40 to 41, with big parity targets for target groups, low SES, rural and regional, First Nations students with disability, an equal effort approach, which might require some further unpacking, a completion bonus, which is interesting, needs-based funding, as we've discussed, demand-driven free preparatory courses, which is not easy to say. We're talking about enabling courses there as a critical pathway into higher education as we're waiting for the school reforms to catch up. Improving regional education, dedicated outreach funding, and a new equity commissioner. And Verity and Kylie are going to take us to some of those matters. So just very quickly on the regional tertiary education piece, there's a whole chapter, as Barney had highlighted, on regional education, targets to increase higher education, rural, regional and remote participation, a regional loading in addition to the needs-based funding, more medical places for regional unis, more regional study hubs, adjusting the tertiary access payment, and a regional education commission to explore further opportunities, including the potential for national regional university. And we're fortunate to have Chris Rowan, who will talk particularly, I'm sure, about the regional study hubs, but also potentially about the other regional opportunities. And if you're any doubt about why we needed to do this, this has been sustained inequity in regional education. You just look at those data again. We had these data in the NAPTINE review and in the Halsey review. Running your eye down, the orange line is major cities completions, inner regional is next, outer regional next, and the grey is remote and very remote. So remote and very remote higher education educational attainment for bachelors is less than half the metropolitan achievement. Looking at the attainment targets, There's a degree of complexity in the report, which I don't have time in my short time to take you to. The idea is that we would set participation targets for 2035 with the aim of parity by 2050. And here you have an orange bar of the Australian population, so that would be the parity target. The grey bar, I'm going to call it, with the education enrolments, and the blue bar with educational completions. I do wonder whether this is correct around regional and remote. And the attainment and the participation targets, for 2035 to get us on the right track, as you see them there. And then the idea is that an individual university target be set for completion depending on their starting point, so wherever they are, and the group of 8 are under, for example, under 10% below SES, what the university context is and what the state or territory target is. So it's distributed by state of territory and state and territories, and this is the concept of equal effort. Darlene would have a view, I'm sure, about the 2035 participation target, which is just to maintain student people with disabilities, and I've just given you a link there to the Children and Young People with Disability Australia who are disappointed with the outcomes of the record. So just 3 quick things I wanted to do in conclusion. This is the big moment for fee-free preparatory courses, a whole recommendation around it. This is the way that these, I would call these enabling courses, but the idea is to expand them and pretty much make them demand-driven and fund them properly. This gets us, so it really is in its time moment for enabling. As NEA, the National Association of Enabling Educators Australia, said, uncapping places for enabling programs would contribute significantly to closing the attainment gap and addressing decades of disadvantage. They're effective on cost. The individuals see them as a low risk test of their ability to go to university, and for government, it's a low risk intervention. As Tim Pittman and his colleagues found in 2016, the low cost strongly influences the decision to enrol, and they're attractive to equity bearing students. And if you just run your eyes down the students that go into enabling courses, they're all the students that Barney has spoken about that we need to encourage to participate in greater rates in higher education. My second point was going to be around learning and teaching. So I'm grateful to EFIA for putting in their submission that we really needed to attend to learning and teaching, because once we get them into university, then our institutional policies, practices, processes, the educational conditions in which we place students need to be transformed to support students to be successfully complete success on their own terms. There are a number of strong recommendations around learning and teaching, quite a bit in there about will. Also on the need for new curriculum and teaching methods for online and hybrid to support more diverse cohorts. How to facilitate student belonging in an expanded system, how to assure world-class learning and teaching for diversity and growth, and with a transformed workforce, and to proceed beyond a minimal compliance threshold that the Higher Education Standards Framework and the proposed Learning and Teaching Council will go a long way in that. And when you get the slides, perhaps you can have a look and see at various other recommendations that have been made around that. And then my final point is around, as I promised in the chat, this more flexible and responsive tertiary education system. So this is another very critical plank, and they do, and thank you, Barney, for saying so, this has enormous equity ramifications for us, not just in the growing skills through equity, but also in their greater access to high quality will. The reform recommendations of the Australian Qualifications Framework have been prioritised for implementation, and that will enable better qualifications and pathways, particularly around the micro-credentials, which might get Commonwealth supported places, degree apprenticeships and other learn and earn opportunities. But the really critical piece from the equity perspective is around recognition of prior learning and recognition of prior experience, and making that portable, transparent and creditable across the institution, a national skills passport, and then the ways that we might facilitate HEPS, TAFEs, VET and industry to collaborate better together. Jobs and Skills Australia, Barney's new gig, is linking the higher education curriculum to an Australian skills classification, a national skills taxonomy, and Barney's mentioned the opportunity for TAFEs to get Commonwealth supported places and self-accrediting status. I'll leave this for you. This is one of my loves around the AQF review. And it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. So Homer can refresh himself, and I'm going to throw a lot of water over myself and just remind myself that we're all running a marathon, but there's a lot to love, and I think we've been very fortunate to be with this point in time. Thank you.